The Force screamed twice that night. The first time was Order 66, and Ahsoka Tano had felt that scream from a distance that should have made it impossible to feel at all. The specific catastrophic collapse of hundreds of connections severing simultaneously. Jedi across the galaxy extinguished in the same window of seconds by the people who had fought beside them. She had felt it the way you felt a physical wound, phantom and real at once, and she had not fully processed it because processing it required time she didn't have. The second scream came 6 hours later, and it was nothing like the first. She was in the cockpit of the salvaged freighter Rex had acquired through channels she'd decided not to ask about, running evasive patterns through a debris field that gave them cover from Imperial sensor sweeps, when the Force did something she had never felt it do before. It tore. Not the specific violence of death, not the familiar wrongness of the dark side's presence, not any of the categories her 17 years of training had given her vocabulary for. Something foreign, a texture in the Force that felt like static, interrupting a signal, like a word spoken in a language that used the same sounds as basic, but arranged them into something with no translatable meaning. Ahsoka. Rex's voice, from the pilot's seat, carrying the specific flat urgency of a soldier, registering that something was wrong before he had data to explain why. "Talk to me. Something's happening," she said. "In the Force. I don't..." She stopped, reaching further, and the reaching hurt in a way that reaching had never hurt before. "I don't have words for what I'm feeling." "Is it them?" Rex said, not needing to specify who. The word carried the weight of the past 6 hours entirely on its own. "No," she said. "This isn't the Empire. This isn't the dark side. This is..." The ship shuddered. Not from weapons fire. She checked the sensors reflexively and found nothing. No incoming fire. No proximity alerts. Nothing that explained the sudden violent shaking that threw her against her harness. "Rex, I've got nothing on sensors," he said, already fighting the controls with the specific controlled panic of a pilot whose instruments were telling him the ship should be flying straight, and the ship was very much not flying straight. "Whatever's happening isn't showing up on anything I've got." The debris field around them began to move. Not scatter. Move, coherently, drawn toward a point that hadn't existed a moment before and now dominated the forward viewport with the specific visual wrongness of space folding in on itself. A tear. A wound in the fabric of the galaxy that light bent around at angles that made Ahsoka's stomach lurch even before the ship's trajectory confirmed what her eyes were telling her. They were being pulled toward it. "Full reverse," Rex called, hands moving across the controls with the speed of someone who had flown through hell more times than he could count. The engines fired. The ship fought. It made no difference. "Ahsoka," Rex said, his voice very controlled in the specific way that meant he had run out of conventional options and was preparing to tell her something she wasn't going to like. "I can't pull us out of this." "I know," she said. She reached for the Force one more time, not to fight the pull but to understand it, and what she found in that final second of reaching was the specific overwhelming sensation of something vast noticing her. Not malevolently, not with any intention she could categorize as hostile or benevolent, simply the way a large body of water noticed a stone dropped into it, through the fact of displacement rather than through choice. Then the tear consumed them. The crash happened in a park in what would later be identified as the Musutafu district at 0347 local time, which meant the impact site was mercifully clear of the pedestrian traffic that would have made the freighter's landing considerably more catastrophic than it already was. Rex got them down using every scrap of piloting skill 30 years of warfare had given him, which meant the ship arrived in a controlled crash rather than an uncontrolled one, still violent enough to shatter half the freighter's hull plating and leave a crater 40 meters wide in what had, until several minutes ago, been a public green space with a duck pond. The duck pond was gone. Ahsoka came to consciousness with the specific disoriented clarity of someone whose body had absorbed significant impact trauma and whose mind was assessing damage before assessing anything else. "Rex," she said. "Here," he said, already moving, already checking his own status with the automatic efficiency of someone who had done exactly this after exactly this kind of crash, more times than either of them could count. "You good?" "I've been better," she said, extracting herself from the wreckage. "Where are we?" She looked up. The sky was wrong. Not the specific violent wrongness of the anomaly they'd been pulled through. Wrong in the sense of unfamiliar. A night sky with constellations she didn't recognize. An atmospheric quality that felt subtly different in ways her body registered before her conscious mind could articulate what exactly was different. The air smelled different. The gravity felt not wrong, exactly, but marginally off from what her body had calibrated to across 17 years of a specific galaxy's physical constants. "We're not in our galaxy anymore," she said. "You can tell that from a park?" Rex said, already assessing the tactical environment with the specific efficiency that 30 years of combat had made automatic. Cover, sight lines, egress routes, all catalogued before he'd finished standing. "I can feel it," she said. "The force is here. But it's different, thinner, like," she searched for the analogy, "like water that's been diluted." Sirens approached. Not the specific pattern of TIE fighter engines or Imperial ground vehicles. Something else. Unfamiliar in its acoustic signature, but unmistakable in its function. Emergency response, converging on their position with the specific urgency of professionals who understood a crisis had occurred and needed managing. "Company," Rex said. "Let me talk first," Ahsoka said. "You're not exactly diplomatic when you're covered in duck pond," Rex observed. "Neither are you," she said. "And you're better with people who aren't shooting at you yet." The first responders arrived in configurations that neither of them recognized. Vehicles with unfamiliar design language, personnel in uniforms that combined law enforcement aesthetics with something that read, to Ahsoka's trained eye, as combat adjacent but not military in any framework she understood. And then the people with abilities arrived. She felt them before she saw them clearly. Not the Force, not exactly, but something adjacent to it. A specific quality of power that ran through several of the approaching figures in ways that her Force sensitivity registered as significant without being able to categorize precisely. A woman descended from the sky on what appeared to be actual wings, landing with the specific controlled grace of someone who had practiced that exact maneuver thousands of times. A man's arms extended to lengths that violated basic anatomy, reaching toward the crash site with the specific quality of a professional securing a scene. "This is going to require a different kind of first conversation than I planned," Ahsoka said quietly. "Ma'am, sir," the winged woman called, her voice carrying the specific authority of trained emergency response. "Please remain where you are. This area has been designated." Rex's hand moved automatically toward the blaster at his hip. "Don't," Ahsoka said, low and urgent. "I'm not drawing," he said. "I'm assessing." "They're assessing too," she said. "Let's not give them a reason to escalate." The winged woman's expression shifted, the specific quality of someone processing something outside her operational experience. "That crash pattern," she called. "That's not consistent with any known vehicle classification." "Are you?" She paused. "What's your quirk classification?" "My what?" Ahsoka said. The word meant nothing to her, which the winged woman apparently found alarming in itself, because her posture shifted toward defensive readiness. "Everyone has a quirk," she said. "It's not a question you should need clarified." "We're not from here," Ahsoka said, choosing honesty as the most efficient path through what she could already feel, becoming a rapidly deteriorating situation. "I don't know what a quirk is. We crashed here by accident." "That's not." The woman's communicator crackled, and whatever she heard through it produced a visible change in her bearing. "Backups requested. Pro-hero response inbound." More figures were arriving. Ahsoka counted them with the specific rapid assessment she'd developed across a war. 6, then 8, then a dozen individuals with varying capabilities converging on the crash site, and the specific quality of their approach shifting from emergency response towards something that read unmistakably as tactical containment. "They think we're a threat," Rex said quietly. "We probably look like one," Ahsoka said. "Two armed strangers who fell out of the sky in a ship nobody's ever seen, in a crater where a park used to be." "So what's the play?" Rex said. "We don't fight unless they force it," she said. "And if they force it, we don't hurt anyone." "That's a nice principle," Rex said. "Might not survive contact." It didn't. The first strike came from a young hero. Ahsoka would later learn his name was Ingenium, though in this moment he was simply a figure moving with impossible speed, closing the distance between his position and theirs faster than any unaugmented human should be capable of moving, his legs producing a mechanical whine that suggested some kind of engine-enhanced capability rather than pure biology. He was fast. Ahsoka was faster, in the specific sense that mattered, not physical speed, but the force-honed anticipation that let her read his trajectory before he'd fully committed to it, let her position herself to redirect rather than absorb the impact. She caught his outstretched arm, used his own momentum against his balance, and put him on the ground with the specific controlled precision of someone who had spent 17 years learning exactly how much force disabled without harming. He was up in seconds, staring at her with the specific shock of someone who had never lost a speed contest before. "You," he started. "I don't want to fight you," Ahsoka said. "None of you. We're not your enemy." More heroes closed in. Rex had already moved to the crash site's most defensible terrain feature, a collapsed section of the freighter's hull that provided cover and a controlled approach angle, and was directing the engagement with the specific quiet competence of a man who had commanded troops through the worst battles of the Clone Wars. "Don't engage the flanks," he called to Ahsoka, without needing to specify who he meant. "Force them to funnel." She heard the tactical wisdom in it immediately and adjusted her positioning, and the heroes converging on their position found themselves, without quite understanding how, being channeled into a specific approach corridor that gave Rex sightlines and gave Ahsoka the room she needed to disarm rather than harm. A woman with the capacity to generate localized gravity fields attempted to pin them in place. Ahsoka felt the field forming and moved before it fully activated, the specific predictive quality of force sensitivity reading intention before action. A man with acid-generating capability attempted to create a barrier. Rex identified the compound's dispersal pattern and repositioned before it could effectively contain him, using terrain the man hadn't accounted for. The fight lasted 4 minutes. At the end of it, 7 pro-heroes were disabled without serious injury. Ahsoka had 2 lightsabers ignited, but had not used them for anything beyond deflecting incoming strikes, and Rex stood at the crash site's center with his blaster never having fired a single shot. The remaining heroes held their positions, uncertain, processing the specific reality that 2 strangers had just defeated a coordinated group response without inflicting serious harm on anyone. "Stand down," called a new voice, older, carrying an authority the others deferred to immediately, and Ahsoka turned to find a tall figure with an unmistakable presence approaching the crater's edge. All Might. She didn't know the name yet, but she recognized, in the specific way she'd learned to recognize significant figures across a galaxy of significant figures, that this was someone whose presence mattered. "We don't want to fight," Ahsoka said, before he could speak. "We fell into your world by accident. We're not here to hurt anyone." All Might studied her. The lightsabers, the montrals, the specific quality of controlled restraint in how she'd conducted the engagement, and then studied Rex, whose bearing communicated military discipline in a language that translated across any culture. "You defeated 7 trained heroes without seriously injuring any of them," he said. "That is either extraordinary skill or extraordinary restraint. Possibly both." "Both," Ahsoka confirmed. "And you," All Might said, turning to Rex. "No apparent quirk. Yet you directed that engagement with considerable tactical sophistication." "I'm a soldier," Rex said simply. "Tactics are what I've got instead of powers." All Might was quiet for a moment, processing this with the specific weight of someone encountering something his framework hadn't previously required. "I think," he said finally, "we have a great deal to discuss." Ahsoka lowered her sabers. Behind her, in the wreckage of their ship, something in the specific way the Force moved through this new world settled into her awareness, with the particular clarity of a conclusion she hadn't wanted to reach, but couldn't avoid. This world is strong, she thought, but it's not ready. She didn't yet know what it needed to be ready for. She would find out soon enough. UA High School's main conference room had not been designed to accommodate the specific category of meeting currently occurring within it, which meant that Principal Nezu had spent the first 15 minutes rearranging furniture with the brisk efficiency of someone whose intelligence exceeded the room's original architectural assumptions. Ahsoka sat across from him, Rex beside her, and on the other side of the table sat All Might, Aizawa, and a small delegation of government liaisons, whose specific bureaucratic anxiety was visible in ways that reminded Ahsoka uncomfortably of Senate committee meetings she'd sat through as a Padawan. "So," Nezu said, folding his paws together with the specific precision of a creature whose every gesture communicated calculated intent. "You are not from this world." "No," Ahsoka said. "And your abilities?" Nezu gestured toward her mantrals with the specific curiosity of a scientist encountering genuinely novel data. "You described them as connection to something called the Force, not a quirk in the conventional sense." "Not in your sense," Ahsoka agreed. "The Force isn't a mutation or a biological trait. It's—" She searched for language that would translate across the conceptual gap. "It's an energy field that connects all living things. Some beings can access it more strongly than others. I was born with significant sensitivity to it, and trained for 17 years to use that sensitivity." "And your companion?" Nezu's attention shifted to Rex with the specific quality of someone conducting an equally thorough assessment. "No connection to this force. No apparent quirk. Quirkless," Aizawa said, from where he sat with his characteristic slouched posture, his eyes carrying an assessment that was more careful than his casual bearing suggested. And yet, he directed a tactical engagement that outmaneuvered 7 trained pro-heroes. "I'm a career soldier," Rex said. 30 years of active combat experience across a war that killed most of the people I served with. Tactics and discipline aren't a substitute for power. They're a different category of capability." "In our society," one of the government liaisons said, with the specific careful diplomacy of someone navigating politically sensitive territory, quirklessness is statistically rare and has historically been associated with significant social and professional limitations. "The idea that someone without a quirk could out-tactic 7 quirk users is exactly the kind of assumption that gets soldiers killed," Rex said, not unkindly, but with the flat directness that 30 years of war had made permanent. "Power without discipline loses to discipline without power more often than people expect. I've watched it happen, repeatedly." The room absorbed this. Aizawa's expression had shifted into something more focused, the specific quality of someone recalculating an assessment based on new information that challenged an assumption they hadn't realized they'd been making. "I'd like to understand your combat methodology," he said. "In detail." "Why?" Rex asked. "Because my quirk erases other quirks," Aizawa said. "For as long as my erasure is active, I'm functionally in the same position you are, capability without power. I've spent my career developing combat approaches that don't rely on abilities I can't count on having access to when I need them most." He met Rex's eyes with the specific directness of professional recognition. "I suspect you and I have more in common than anyone else in this room." Rex studied him for a moment. "I'd be glad to talk shop," he said, and something in his bearing shifted slightly. The specific quality of a soldier recognizing a kindred professional in unfamiliar territory. Ahsoka watched this exchange with quiet interest, filing away the observation that this world's hero society, for all its power-centric culture, contained individuals who understood something closer to what she and Rex represented. "The question before us," Nezu said, redirecting the conversation with the specific efficiency of an administrator managing competing priorities, "is what happens next. You arrived through a phenomenon we don't understand, in a manner that suggests significant power beyond conventional quirk classification. The government's position," he glanced at the liaisons, "is understandably cautious." "We understand," Ahsoka said. "We're strangers, with significant capability, in a world that doesn't know us. Caution is reasonable." What we're proposing, Nezu continued, is a period of evaluation. You would remain at UA, under faculty observation. In exchange for cooperation with our assessment, we would provide resources to help you understand this world, and potentially, he paused, assist in understanding how you arrived, and whether the phenomenon that brought you here poses any ongoing risk. Ahsoka exchanged a glance with Rex. Acceptable, she said. With one condition. If we determine there's a genuine threat connected to how we arrived, you listen to us immediately, without requiring extensive bureaucratic process first. The government liaisons exchanged uncomfortable glances. That's not how, one began. That's the condition, Ahsoka said, with the specific quiet authority that had commanded clone battalions across a galaxy-spanning war. I'm not trying to circumvent your systems for convenience. I'm telling you that whatever tore us out of our galaxy and dropped us here was not a natural phenomenon. It was violent, and it was strange, and I have a very bad feeling that it wasn't a one-time event. The room was quiet. Agreed, Nezu said finally. The students found out within hours, because students always found out within hours. And by the following morning, the specific quality of rumor and speculation that had built around the two strangers had reached the kind of fevered intensity that only teenagers could generate. Ahsoka met the first-year hero course during their morning training session, standing at the edge of the training ground while All Might made introductions with the specific enthusiasm he brought to everything involving his students' development. This is Ahsoka Tano, he said. She'll be observing and, with faculty permission, potentially assisting with combat training during her evaluation period. The reactions were immediate and varied. Ochako Uraraka's eyes went wide, with the specific delight of someone encountering something genuinely new. Todoroki's expression remained characteristically controlled, but his attention sharpened in a way that suggested genuine interest beneath the reserve. Bakugo's reaction was the specific aggressive skepticism Ahsoka had already learned to expect from him after one brief introduction the previous evening. "So, what's your deal?" he said, arms crossed. "Some kind of alien mutant quirk?" "Not a quirk," Ahsoka said patiently. "Something different. I use an energy called the Force." "Yeah, whatever," Bakugo said. "Can you actually fight? Or are you just some kind of science experiment they're keeping around for study?" Several students winced at the directness. Ahsoka simply studied him for a moment, the specific quality of assessment that made most people uncomfortable, but that Bakugo, she noted, seemed to weather without flinching. "I fought 7 of your pro-heroes without seriously injuring any of them," she said. "You're welcome to test that claim yourself, if you'd like." Something shifted in Bakugo's expression, not backing down, but recalibrating, the specific recognition of someone who respected directness, even when it was aimed at him. "Maybe I will," he said. After training protocol, All Might interjected, with the specific diplomatic timing of someone who had spent considerable time managing Bakugo's competitive instincts. "For now, Ahsoka will be observing your combat exercises and offering feedback." The training exercise that followed was, Ahsoka noted, sophisticated by the standards of any formal combat education program she'd encountered. Structured, safety-conscious, designed to develop individual quirk application through progressively challenging scenarios. It was also, she noticed within the first 15 minutes, built almost entirely around individual capability rather than coordinated unit tactics. "Your training doesn't emphasize teamwork," she observed to All Might, during a break in the exercises. "We do have team-based exercises," he said. "The battle trial format specifically develops cooperative strategy." "I've seen the format," she said. "It's good, but it's oriented around small groups, solving discrete tactical problems. What I haven't seen is training that prepares them for sustained, coordinated engagement against an organized, adaptive opponent." She paused. "Your society hasn't experienced actual war. Individual villains, organized crime, isolated incidents, your heroes are excellent at those things. But coordinated warfare is a different category of challenge entirely." All Might's expression carried genuine consideration. "You believe our heroes would struggle against something like that," he said. I believe, Ahsoka said carefully, that your heroes are extraordinarily powerful individuals who have never needed to think like soldiers. That's not a criticism. It's an observation about the specific problems your society has needed to solve. She paused. I've spent 17 years fighting a war that killed most of the people I loved. I recognize gaps in preparation because I've watched those gaps get people killed. All Might was quiet for a long moment. Would you be willing, he said finally, to help address that gap during your evaluation period? I'd need Rex, she said. He's the actual tactician. I'm good in a fight. He's good at winning wars. Rex's assessment of UA's hero training program, delivered to Aizawa over the following 3 days, was considerably more blunt than Ahsoka's diplomatic framing had been. Your students are individually strong, he said, reviewing training footage in Aizawa's office with the specific analytical focus he brought to every tactical problem. Some of them are extraordinarily strong for their age and experience level. But watch this. He pointed to a sequence from a recent battle trial. Uraraka and Ida are supposed to be coordinating. Look at their positioning. Aizawa studied the footage. They're covering overlapping angles, Rex said. Which means if a coordinated opponent forces them to react simultaneously, they're going to interfere with each other's movement. That's not a quirk problem. That's a training problem. Nobody's taught them how to occupy space in relation to each other under pressure. We do formation training, Aizawa said. You do formation training for scenarios where the opposition is predictable, Rex said. I watched 6 months of your archived battle trial footage last night. Every scenario has a defined solution space. Real combat against an adaptive enemy doesn't work that way. The enemy adjusts to what you do, which means your formations need to be flexible in ways that these kids haven't been taught to execute. Aizawa was quiet for a long moment, processing this with the specific, careful attention of a professional who recognized valid criticism when he heard it, regardless of how uncomfortable it was to hear. You're saying our entire training philosophy has a blind spot, he said. I'm saying your training philosophy was built for the threats you've faced, Rex said, which have mostly been individual villains and small organized groups. If something bigger ever comes, something that thinks strategically, that coordinates multiple threats simultaneously, that studies your heroes' patterns and adapts to counter them, your kids are going to be in serious trouble. Something like what? Aizawa said. Rex was quiet for a moment. I don't know, he said honestly, but Ahsoka's been on edge since we got here. And in my experience, when a Jedi's instincts start telling them something's wrong, it's usually wrong. The bioelectric signature registered on UA's support equipment at 0213 on the 4th night, flagged by an automated monitoring system that had been quietly cataloging atmospheric and electromagnetic anomalies since the crash, per Nezu's specific instruction that any unusual readings connected to the stranger's arrival be documented regardless of apparent significance. The technician on duty, a support course student pulling overnight monitoring shifts for practical credit, almost dismissed it as sensor noise. Almost. The signature was unlike anything in the database. Not a quirk signature. Those had a specific electromagnetic profile that the equipment was calibrated to recognize across thousands of documented variations. Not standard electrical interference, not weather-related atmospheric disturbance, not any of the categories the system was designed to filter automatically. Something that pulsed with the specific rhythm of a heartbeat, if a heartbeat could be measured in gigahertz. Something that had appeared at the exact coordinates of the original crash site, 6 days after the fact, and had been growing steadily stronger for the past 4 hours. The technician, uncertain but following protocol, flagged the reading and sent notification to the faculty monitoring channel. The notification reached Aizawa's terminal at 0217. He was asleep, which meant it wouldn't reach his actual attention until morning. By morning, the signature had moved. The attack began at 11:40 during the first-year hero course's outdoor combat training, when 11 villains breached UA's perimeter security in a coordinated assault that the school's monitoring systems had failed to detect until the intrusion was already 3 minutes old. Ahsoka felt it before the alarms sounded. She was observing a training exercise from the elevated instructor platform when the specific quality of the force around her shifted, not the foreign wrongness she'd sensed on the night of their arrival, but something adjacent to it, sharper now, closer, carrying the specific texture of malice given direction. "Rex," she said, already moving. "I feel it," he said, which was inaccurate in the literal sense. He had no force sensitivity whatsoever, but accurate in the sense that 30 years of combat had given him an instinct for danger that functioned through entirely different mechanisms and arrived at the same conclusion just as fast. The alarms sounded 4 seconds later. The villains who breached the perimeter were, by any conventional assessment, a mid-tier threat. 11 individuals with varying quirks, coordinated enough to overwhelm standard security, but not sophisticated enough to represent an existential threat to a facility staffed by professional heroes and defended by dozens of powered students in active training. All Might engaged the lead group within 90 seconds, and the specific overwhelming force of his intervention should have ended the encounter within minutes. It didn't, because something else arrived first. Ahsoka saw it from the instructor platform, a shape moving through the chaos of the villain incursion, with a quality that immediately separated it from everything else happening on the training ground. Not fighting the heroes, not fighting the students. Moving through the villain formation with the specific cold efficiency of something that had assessed every combatant present and determined that the villains, not the heroes, were the immediate obstacle to whatever it actually wanted. It killed the villains. Not disabled, killed, in the space of seconds, with a precision that made even All Might's overwhelming physical power look almost gentle by comparison. 11 villains, each dispatched with the specific economy of motion that suggested not rage or bloodlust, but calculation, the removal of variables that were no longer useful to whatever process was unfolding. The training ground went silent. All Might turned toward the entity, his expression carrying the specific alarm of someone who had just watched something demonstrate lethal capability that exceeded anything in his operational experience. "Identify yourself," he said. The entity did not respond in language. It was humanoid, in rough configuration, which was, Ahsoka would later understand, less a fixed form than a default state, a baseline shape that concealed a capacity for change she hadn't yet witnessed. Its surface had a quality that resisted easy categorization, not skin, not armor, something that shifted texture in the specific way of a material still deciding what it wanted to be. Where its eyes should have been was a smooth absence that nonetheless conveyed the specific sensation of being observed with total attention. It looked at All Might, then it looked past him, directly at Ahsoka. She felt the recognition arrive through the Force, with the specific, horrifying clarity of something she had been dreading, without fully admitting she was dreading it. It followed us. The entity moved, not toward the heroes converging on the training ground, not toward the students who had been evacuated to defensive positions per emergency protocol, toward All Might specifically, the single most powerful individual present, with the specific, efficient directness of something conducting an assessment through direct engagement. All Might met the charge. The impact that followed shook the training ground's reinforced structure hard enough to crack support pillars 40 meters away, and for 3 seconds, Ahsoka watched the single most powerful hero in this world's history trade blows with something that matched him, joint for joint, with no apparent effort. Then the entity did something that made Ahsoka's stomach drop with the specific clarity of understanding a threat's true nature. It changed. Its right arm reconfigured mid-engagement, not slowly, not through any visible biological process, but through the specific, instantaneous shift of something rewriting its own physical parameters in real time. The arm that met All Might's next strike had a different density, a different structural configuration, something that absorbed the impact in a way its previous configuration hadn't been optimized for. "It's adapting," Rex said, arriving at Ahsoka's position with his blaster already drawn, his tactical assessment running at full speed. In real time, mid-fight. "It's studying him," Ahsoka said, "learning his patterns, testing what works." The engagement continued for another 90 seconds, and in that 90 seconds, Ahsoka watched the entity's combat effectiveness increase visibly, not through fatigue on All Might's part, but through the entity's own accelerating refinement. Each exchange teaching it something new about the specific physics and capabilities it was facing. All Might landed a strike that should have ended the fight. The entity absorbed it, and its surface rippled with something that looked, for a fraction of a second, like the specific quirk signature Ahsoka had learned to recognize as a hardening ability, not All Might's own capability, but a stolen approximation of a defensive quirk it had apparently observed somewhere in the chaos of the past 90 seconds. "It's not just adapting," Ahsoka said, horror crystallizing into understanding. "It's copying. It's taking abilities from everyone it engages." Rex's expression hardened. "Then the longer this fight goes," he said, "the stronger it gets." He was already moving, shouting instructions to the nearest cluster of heroes with the specific command authority that had directed clone battalions across 100 worlds. "Fall back. Do not engage directly. Every engagement is teaching it something new." Some of the heroes heard him. Some didn't, or didn't process the instruction fast enough, and Ahsoka watched 3 more pro-heroes engage the entity in the following minute, each engagement ending in defeat, and each defeat leaving the entity marginally more capable than it had been before. She reached for the Force. What she found waiting for her was the specific wrongness she'd been dreading, the entity's presence registering not as a living thing in the way the Force understood living things, but as something adjacent, parallel, a consciousness that existed in a register the Force could sense but not fully comprehend. It sensed her too. She felt its attention shift, mid-engagement with a hero whose electricity-based quirk it was in the process of absorbing, and for a fraction of a second, its attention turned toward her with the specific quality of recognition. Then it turned back to the fight. Not dismissing her, she understood this with the particular clarity that came from Force sensitivity reading intention rather than action, prioritizing. It had assessed her as a threat worth addressing, and had determined that the current engagement offered more immediate value, and had filed her for later consideration with the cold efficiency of a strategist managing a target list. "Rex," she said, "it's not attacking randomly. It's building toward something." "I know," Rex said, already directing students toward defensive positions with the specific efficient authority that made teenagers who'd never taken orders from a quirkless stranger before nonetheless fall into formation because something in his bearing communicated competence they instinctively trusted. "It's testing everything it can reach before it commits to a real engagement. This is reconnaissance." "Reconnaissance for what?" "I don't know yet," Rex said. "But whatever it's building toward, it's going to be worse than this." The entity finished absorbing the electricity quirk. Ahsoka watched arcs of energy ripple across its shifting surface, integrating into its physical repertoire with the specific speed of something that had made this exact process thousands of times before, and turned to face the remaining defenders. All Might, breathing hard, positioned himself at the center of the defensive formation. "You will not harm my students," he said, his voice carrying across the training ground with the specific weight that had ended countless conflicts before they escalated further. The entity looked at him. Then, for the first time since its arrival, it spoke. The voice that emerged had no consistent quality, shifting between registers with each syllable, as though it were still deciding what a voice should sound like, and hadn't yet committed to a final configuration. "Interesting," it said. "You lead through presence rather than force. Inefficient, but interesting." "What are you?" All Might demanded. "Undetermined," it said, still becoming. It looked past him, toward Ahsoka one more time. "You brought me here," it said. "Through the tear, I was fragmented, formless. This world's abundance of variation has been instructive." "You followed us," Ahsoka said, the words carrying the specific weight of confirmed dread. "You are the anomaly that opened the pathway," it said. "I existed at the boundary of your dying galaxy's collapse, the specific accumulated violence of your war's ending, given enough coherence by the scale of the death to develop something adjacent to purpose." A pause. its surface rippling with something that might have been the equivalent of consideration. I did not choose to follow. I was drawn through the same disturbance that drew you. But I have found this world's resources considerably more promising than anything remaining in the wreckage I emerged from. You're feeding on conflict, Rex said. That's what this is. Every fight you're in makes you stronger. An efficient assessment, the entity said. Yes, conflict generates data. Data generates capability. Your galaxy provided decades of war. This world provides variation I have never encountered. Quirks, you call them. Thousands of distinct capabilities, each one a new tool, once properly understood. You're going to keep attacking, Ahsoka said, until you've absorbed enough capability to accomplish whatever it is you actually want. Yes, the entity said, with the specific, simple honesty of something that had no reason to deceive because deception required investment in an outcome it hadn't yet decided to pursue. Today was reconnaissance. I have learned considerably. I will return when I have determined the optimal configuration for what comes next. It turned. Wait, All Might said, moving to intercept. The entity was gone before he completed the word. Not fleeing in any conventional sense Ahsoka's force sensitivity could track, but simply ceasing to be present in the space it had occupied. The specific, abrupt absence of something that had decided the engagement was complete and had implemented that decision with total efficiency. The training ground was quiet. 11 dead villains. 4 pro-heroes down, injured but alive. All Might standing amid wreckage that his own considerable power had contributed to, but that the entity's brief engagement had made significantly worse. Ahsoka stood at the platform's edge, feeling the specific weight of confirmation settle over her. She had brought this here. Not deliberately. She understood the distinction the entity itself had articulated, that neither of them had chosen the anomaly that connected their fates. But the distinction didn't change the practical reality. A war-born predator that had been contained within the wreckage of her dying galaxy was now loose in a world that had never faced anything like it, and its presence here traced directly back to the tier that had pulled their ship through the collapsing anomaly. "This is my fault," she said quietly. "No," Rex said, arriving beside her, his expression carrying the specific grim determination that had gotten them both through worse than this. "It's not. You didn't choose this any more than it chose you." He looked at the wreckage, at the injured heroes being tended to, at the students standing in their formations with expressions that had shifted from training ground confidence to genuine fear. "But it's here now, which means it's our problem to solve, whether we caused it or not. How do we fight something that gets stronger every time we fight it?" Ahsoka said. Rex was quiet for a long moment, his tactical mind working through the problem with the specific patient thoroughness that had won battles across 100 worlds. "We don't fight it the way it expects to be fought," he said finally. "It's been fighting individual combatants, heroes acting alone or in small groups, each engagement teaching it something new. We change the equation." "How?" Ahsoka said. "We make it fight everyone at once," Rex said. "Coordinated, overwhelming. Before it can adapt to any single approach, it has to process too much simultaneously." He looked at her. "It's a soldier's problem, Ahsoka, and I know how to solve soldiers' problems." Aizawa approached, his expression carrying the specific exhausted focus of someone processing a crisis that exceeded everything his professional experience had prepared him for. "You said this was coming," he said. "Days ago, you told us something might be following you." "I felt something wrong," Ahsoka said. "I didn't know it was this." "What is it?" Aizawa said. "Something that was born from the last days of my galaxy's war," Ahsoka said. "A consciousness that formed out of enough accumulated violence and death that it developed something like purpose. It's not evil in the way your villains are evil. It doesn't hate. It doesn't want power for its own sake. It processes conflict as information and uses that information to become more capable." She paused. "It's not a villain, Aizawa. It's a weapon that woke up." Aizawa absorbed this. "How do we stop a weapon that gets stronger every time we try?" he said. "We don't let it choose the terms of engagement again," Rex said. Next time, we're ready. Next time, it faces everything at once, and it doesn't get the luxury of learning one lesson at a time. He looked at the training ground, at the wreckage, at the specific quality of a hero society that had just learned, in the most brutal way possible, that its assumptions about the nature of threats had a significant blind spot. "We've got work to do," he said, "and not much time to do it." The entity returned 9 days later, and by then it had stopped being humanoid in any consistent sense. Rex's 9 days had not been idle. He had spent them in UA's largest training facility, with Aizawa, All Might, and every teacher willing to abandon their existing curriculum in favor of something that resembled, more than anything else in this world's history, actual military doctrine. Formation combat isn't about individual power, Rex told the assembled second and third-year students on the 6th day, standing before a whiteboard covered in diagrams that looked nothing like the tactical breakdowns UA had used before. It's about denying your opponent the ability to fight you on their terms. This entity adapts to what it fights, so we don't let it fight the same thing twice. How do you fight something you can't predict? Momo Yaoyorozu asked, her expression carrying the specific analytical focus that had made her one of Rex's most attentive students during the crash course. You don't predict it, Rex said. You overwhelm its capacity to process. Right now, it learns from every engagement, because every engagement is sequential. One hero, one quirk, one lesson. We're going to give it 40 simultaneous problems and see how well it adapts when it can't focus on any single variable long enough to master it. The plan that emerged over the following days combined every resource UA and the surrounding pro-hero infrastructure could muster. Coordinated formations built around complementary quirk types, communication protocols that let dozens of combatants share real-time tactical information, and a specific layered defense structure that Rex had adapted from Clone Wars battlefield doctrine to accommodate abilities no clone trooper had ever needed to coordinate around. Ahsoka spent the same 9 days doing something considerably harder, teaching students to read combat the way she read it, the specific predictive awareness that came from force sensitivity, translated, as best she could manage, into trainable instinct. You're not watching what they're doing, she told Uraraka, during a training exercise on the 7th day. You're watching what they're about to do, their weight shift, their breathing, the specific micro-hesitation before commitment. She paused. You won't develop full force sensitivity, but you can train yourself to notice more than you currently notice. It wasn't the force, but it was something, and something was more than they'd had 9 days ago. The entity's return came without warning, which Rex had anticipated and prepared for regardless. Alert systems positioned across UA's campus with redundancy that ensured no single point of failure could delay response. Evacuation protocols that moved civilians and younger students to secured shelter within 90 seconds of activation. It arrived in the same crater where their ship had first crashed, which Ahsoka understood immediately as significant. Not coincidental, but deliberate, the entity returning to the specific point of origin with the quality of something completing a cycle it had begun. It was no longer humanoid. What emerged from the crater's center was something that defied consistent categorization even by the standards Ahsoka had established watching its first appearance, a form that shifted between configurations with each passing second, incorporating elements she recognized from the villains it had killed 9 days ago, from the heroes whose quirks it had sampled during that first catastrophic engagement, and from something else entirely, something that suggested it had spent the intervening days seeking out additional conflicts beyond UA's campus to further its collection. It's been busy, Rex observed grimly, watching the readouts from the command position he'd established in UA's reinforced monitoring center. How many quirks do you think it's absorbed since the last engagement? Aizawa asked. Too many to count individually, Ahsoka said, reaching through the Force to assess the entity's presence and finding it vastly more complex than it had been 9 days ago. Layers upon layers of capability, each one a discrete signature she could sense, but not fully parse. It's not just stronger, it's more varied, more adaptable. Then we adapt faster, Rex said. All positions, execute formation convergence. The response that followed was unlike anything Ahsoka had witnessed in either galaxy she'd fought across. 43 combatants, pro-heroes, UA faculty, and third-year students, judged combat-ready by Aizawa's careful assessment, moved into position around the entity's location with the specific coordinated precision that 9 days of Rex's training had instilled. Not a mob converging on a single target. A structured engagement, layered in depth, with communication protocols that let each combatant know what every other combatant was doing in real time. The entity assessed the formation. Ahsoka felt its attention move across the assembled defenders with the specific quality of a strategist calculating engagement priorities, and for the first time since its arrival, she sensed something adjacent to hesitation. Not fear. The entity likely didn't experience fear in any form she could recognize, but the specific calculating pause of something recognizing that its usual approach might not apply. "You've changed your methodology," it said, its voice still carrying the shifting multi-register quality from their first encounter. "Interesting. Adaptation. I did not anticipate this from a species without formal military tradition." "We had help," All Might said, positioned at the formation's center with the specific commanding presence that anchored the entire structure. "The clone commander," the entity said, its attention shifting toward Rex's position in the monitoring center with a precision that suggested it could sense him despite the physical distance. "Yes, his patterns are recognizable. Military doctrine, adapted for unfamiliar variables." A pause. "It will not be sufficient." It attacked. Not toward the formation's weakest point, toward its center, toward All Might specifically, with the direct efficiency of something that had calculated the fastest path to disrupting the coordinated structure by eliminating its anchor. All Might met the charge, and for 3 seconds the engagement looked identical to their first encounter. Then the formation activated. Todoroki's ice extended across the crater's northern approach, not to attack the entity directly, but to constrain its mobility, forcing it into a specific engagement zone. Bakugo's explosions, coordinated with 3 other combatants through the communication protocol Rex had established, created a suppression field that prevented the entity from disengaging towards secondary targets. Uraraka's gravity manipulation, applied not to the entity but to debris and terrain features around it, created obstacles that shifted the battlefield's geometry in real time. The entity found itself, for the first time since its arrival, unable to isolate a single opponent to study. Ahsoka moved into the engagement with the specific fluid awareness that 17 years of Jedi training had made instinctive, reading the entity's shifting patterns and calling adjustments to the formation through the communication link Rex had established. "It's trying to break east," she called. "Redirect Ida and the mobility unit." "Copy," Rex's voice came back, and within seconds, the formation shifted to close the gap she'd identified. The entity tried to adapt. It absorbed Todoroki's ice, its surface rippling with a new configuration that granted temporary cold resistance, but the absorption took time, a fraction of a second longer than its previous adaptations, because the sheer volume of simultaneous stimuli was overwhelming its processing capacity in exactly the way Rex had theorized. "It's slowing down," Ahsoka called. "The adaptation cycle is taking longer." "Then we keep the pressure constant," Rex said. "Every unit, maintain engagement tempo. Don't give it recovery time." The battle that followed lasted 11 minutes, and every one of those minutes was fought at the specific edge of catastrophe that defined genuine warfare. Heroes pushed beyond their previous limits. Students discovering capabilities they hadn't known they possessed under the specific pressure of coordinated necessity. The entity itself growing more desperate as its accumulated advantages proved insufficient against a structure that denied it the sequential engagements it had been built to exploit. Ahsoka felt the moment the tide turned. Not through any single decisive blow, but through the accumulated weight of 43 combatants operating as a genuine coordinated force for the first time in this world's history. Each one contributing to a structure larger than their individual capability. And the entity, for all its accumulated power, for all its absorbed capabilities, finding itself facing something it had never been designed to counter. Coordination. The entity's form began to destabilize. Not from damage in any conventional sense. Ahsoka watched its physical structure begin to fracture, along lines that suggested the accumulated stress of processing too much simultaneous information. Too many absorbed capabilities competing for coherent expression within a form that had never needed to hold this much complexity at once. "This is not," it said, its voice fragmenting alongside its physical form, "the expected outcome." "You built yourself to win individual fights," Rex said, his voice carrying across the battlefield through the communication network. "We stopped giving you individual fights." The entity's form collapsed inward, the specific violence of something too complex to sustain its own coherence, finding, in that collapse, a kind of resolution. And then, in the final moment before its structure fully dissolved, it did something none of them anticipated. It reached toward the tear. Ahsoka felt it through the Force, the same dimensional anomaly that had pulled their ship into this world, still present in some latent form at the crater's exact coordinates, and the entity's dissolving consciousness reaching for that latent presence with the specific desperate quality of something seeking an exit, rather than accepting an ending. The anomaly flared, not fully opening, not the violent tear that had consumed their ship, but a resonance, a sympathetic activation triggered by the entity's final act. And through that resonance, Ahsoka felt something that made her breath catch. The Force, reaching back through the tear toward its source. The entity vanished, not destroyed in any final sense she could confirm, but pulled back through the anomaly it had followed them through, returned to whatever remained of the wreckage it had emerged from, leaving behind a crater and 43 exhausted combatants, and a silence that carried the specific weight of survival rather than triumph. The anomaly remained active for 6 hours after the entity's departure, stabilizing into something considerably calmer than its initial violent tear, a shimmer in the air above the crater, visible only to those with sufficient sensitivity to perceive it, carrying the specific quality of a door left ajar rather than fully open. Ahsoka stood at its edge as evening settled over UA's campus, feeling its presence with the particular attention she'd learned to give to things that mattered. Rex found her there. "You're thinking about going back," he said. Not a question. "I'm thinking about a lot of things," she said. "The galaxy needs us, Rex. Whatever remains of the Republic, whatever's left of the people we knew, they're facing something we understand. The Empire. Order 66. A war we know how to fight, even if we don't know how to win it. And here?" Rex said. "Here, we just helped stop something neither of us fully understood," she said. "In a world that's still figuring out what it means to face genuine coordinated threats." She paused. "They need more time to be ready for what's coming. I don't know if we're the ones who should give them that time." Rex was quiet for a long moment, looking at the shimmer above the crater. "I spent 30 years fighting a war I didn't choose," he said finally. "Following orders I sometimes agreed with and sometimes didn't, because that's what soldiers do. And then the war ended in the worst possible way, and I found myself with an inhibitor chip in my head that almost made me kill the person I trusted most in the galaxy." He paused. "I don't know what I am anymore, outside of being a soldier, but I know I'm good at this, at training people, at building something that works." He looked at her. "Maybe that's worth more here than it would be there right now." Ahsoka absorbed this. "You want to stay," she said. "I want you to make the choice that's right for you," Rex said. "I'll follow you either direction. But if you're asking what I think," he looked at the crater, at the students who had fought and survived and grown in the past 9 days into something considerably more capable than they'd been before. "I think we did something here that mattered. And I think it's not finished." Ahsoka closed her eyes and reached through the Force one final time. Not toward the anomaly, but through it, feeling for the specific quality of what waited on the other side, what remained of the galaxy that had shaped both their entire lives. What she found stopped her breath. The Force, faint but unmistakable, present in this world in a way it hadn't been 9 days ago. Not the foreign wrongness of the original disturbance, not the entity's adjacent consciousness, something else entirely. Something new. Something growing. "Rex," she said, her voice carrying a weight he immediately recognized. "What is it?" he said. "The Force," she said. "It's here. Really here. Now. In a way it wasn't when we arrived." She opened her eyes, looking at him with the specific quality of someone processing an implication too large to fully articulate. "Our arrival changed something. The tier, the entity, everything that's happened. It opened this world to something it didn't have before." "Is that dangerous?" Rex asked. "I don't know," Ahsoka said honestly. "It could mean more people here develop Force sensitivity over time. It could mean this world becomes vulnerable to things from our galaxy that it was never exposed to before." She paused. "It could mean something wonderful, or something terrible, or both at once. I genuinely don't know." "What do we do with that?" Rex said. Ahsoka looked at the shimmer above the crater, the choice it represented, the galaxy waiting on the other side, and the world they'd already begun to change simply by existing within it. "We stay," she said finally. "For now, long enough to understand what we've started. Long enough to help this world be ready for whatever comes because of what we brought here." She looked at him. "The galaxy's war will still be there if we go back later. But this," she gestured toward the campus, toward the students who had fought beside them, toward the specific quality of a world learning to be more than it had been before. "This needs us now." Rex nodded slowly. "Same mission," he said. "Different battlefield." "Same mission," Ahsoka agreed. Behind them, the shimmer above the crater pulsed once, gently, like something settling into patience rather than urgency. It would still be there when they were ready. For now, there was work to do, students to train, a world to help understand what it had just survived, and the quiet, growing presence of something ancient and vast, beginning to take root in soil that had never held it before. The Force was growing here. What that meant, neither of them could yet say. But they would be here to find out.